bit more at the set work Little Shop of Horrors from Area of Stay 2 Popular Music, and we're going to be looking at the second piece. So there are 3 pieces in this overall set work. We're going to be looking at the second one called Mushnik and Son. It is quite a fun piece of music to listen to. It is actually quite interesting musically, so we're going to whiz through it today with our learning objectives to learn the elements and key terms associated with the set work and to understand the musical context of Mushnik and Son. Before we get into any content though, you need to have a look at the revision questions. Can you please complete the rhythm questions that I've attached to Satchel and submit it before moving on to today's lesson? So you're going to need to pause this video now and have a go at task 1. Now that you've completed task 1, or hopefully, you're carrying on with this video, and we're going to have a little look at the musical context and the different elements in Mushnik and Son. Whilst you're watching this video, you need to be keeping a constant check on the PDF that I have sent you. It's got loads of stuff for you to fill in as you're watching this video, and it's all on the PowerPoint, so it should all make sense, but do give me a little comment on Satchel if you don't understand anything. When it comes to actually editing that PDF, it's probably a good idea for me to mention now that I've also attached a link to something called Small PDF. It is an online PDF editing tool. It is really useful. All you need to do is download the PDF that I've put on Satchel and then upload it to this Small PDF website, and you'll be able to highlight, add comments, do whatever you want to it and save it as your own thing. If there's any issues with that, again, yeah, just let me know in the comments. Alternatively, if you're lucky enough to have a printer, then just print it out. Totally up to you. So, musical context, comedy and Jewishness. So this piece of music is characterised by 2 things, and I always like to think of set works like this. There is a reason why AQA has chosen this piece of music as one of your set works, and the reason why we're looking at Mushnik and Son out of all of the different pieces of music in Little Shop of Horrors is because it's quite easy and there's blatant things that have been done musically to try and convey a sense of something. So in this instance, it's comedy and Jewishness. In this piece, Mushnik is trying to manipulate and encourage Seymour to become his son in order to assure future success and fortune. But this piece of music showcases how Mushnik's character is defined with particular reference to features borrowed from Jewish klezmer music. And any time that I mention anything that is meant to highlight this point, I have highlighted it in red. It's probably just a good point to mention that Alan Menken, one of the composers of this piece of music, is himself Jewish, so I think he gets away with some of maybe the kind of over-the-top klezmer influences. And the piece is also successful in creating a sense of comedy within the music because it's supposed to be funny. Okay? So anything that is supposed to be funny and is portrayed as such in the music will be highlighted in yellow. So a quick look at structure and instrumentation then. So the piece is written for 2 singers, so Mushnik, who is the shop owner, and Seymour, who is our main protagonist. And the instrumentation includes a guitar, a bass, castanets, which is supposed to be funny, and a cymbalom type keyboard with a drum kit. And if you look at the key terminology at the top, which you should probably be filling in your booklet from yesterday as well, maybe do that at the end of the lesson, was a traditional Eastern European instrument often associated with Jewish klezmer music. And the structure is pretty simple. I would love to have attached a lovely score for you, but the score doesn't really exist, which is very helpful from the example, so thank you for that, AQA. But the structure goes introduction, verse, chorus, outro, which is pretty standard for a musical piece. It's nice and simple and easy for us to get our head around. The introduction starts with Mushnik speaking parlando, and parlando is a term used in singing which means speech-like. But shortly after our introduction, we have a 16-bar verse which starts with the lyrics, "How would you like to be my son?" and it's sung pretty much just by Mushnik. It's just a solo. Following that, we have a chorus of 16 bars that starts with the phrase Mushnik and Son, and this is where Mushnik and Seymour joins in for a duet. After that, we have a second verse, which is only 8 bars long now, and I can be Hardy and the Judge are the opening lyrics, and this is where Mushnik and Seymour sing another duet, but this time it's mainly in unison, which we'll get onto in a minute. Then we have another 16-bar chorus. Seymour now starts to take the lead, but it's still a duet, and then we have an outro, which features lots of antiphony, which is some call and response between parts, but again, we'll look at that shortly. So you might want to pause the video now and take some time to fill in all the information to do with structure and instrumentation. And we'll move on to harmony and tonality then. So this piece of music is in C minor, and that's something to remember. That's something the exam board wants you to know, that this is C minor. It's definitely in C minor. The minor tonality is decorated, however, with lots of B naturals and D flats, which suggest a modal tonality. For some of you losers out there like me, you'll be interested in modes and probably know what a Phrygian mode is anyway. But for those of you who aren't interested in that, modes are basically just a different way of playing the major scale if you start on a different note. And we tend to hear modal music more often than not in kind of I suppose world music or traditional folk music from different areas of the world. So this obviously points us towards this klezmer idea. You don't need to remember that it's Phrygian dominant, but you do need to remember that the music is in C minor, but has lots of different notes in it, such as B naturals and D flats, which make it sound as if it's a little bit modal. This leads to many interesting and non-functional chords, so effectively chords we wouldn't expect to see in a C minor scale, which includes C minor chords with major sixths and diminished chords, especially in the verses. And a diminished chord is effectively a minor chord with a flat fifth, and you'll recognise it because it sounds a little bit menacing and scary. And then, just in case you wanted to know, I've got a lovely Phrygian dominant scale at the bottom there, which can also be called a Phrygish scale. There'll be loads of different words that you can use to describe different modes. It all gets very difficult down there. But the main thing to remember from this is that it is C minor, and AQA are quite happy for you to know that this piece is C minor. Much in step except for in the chorus, when we do have some wide leaps of minor and major sixths. It uses a wide vocal range, and the piece ends with a chromatic ascending scale, chromatic meaning white and black notes if you're a keyboard player, so all of the notes, within an octave, a chromatic ascending scale of an octave, with then an octave leap back down to the tonic note of C, which nicely punctuates the end of our piece of music. The piece is characterised by short syllabic, meaning one syllable per note, staccato phrases, and staccato means short, sharp notes. This kind of does sound quite klezmer-y, and there's also use of parlando, which obviously means to speak rather than sing, in the introduction and the verse, which highlights the comedic nature of Mushnik's actions as he's kind of talking to one side to the audience. When it comes to texture and dynamics, the piece is mainly melody-dominated homophony, and that's pretty standard for a musical number because we have our singing, and then underneath the singing we have our accompaniment. The piece features lots of antiphony and dialogue between the two characters. And antiphony is interaction between two different singers or choirs, which will tend to be on kind of opposite sides of the stage. If we had it in church music, then you would have two different choirs on two different sides of a church. If you think of it in kind of tech terms, which I would do, it's like when you're in GarageBand or Logic and you pan music either to the right side or to the left side. That is effectively what antiphony is. The two characters' vocal parts gradually get more and more similar and end with mainly unison parts. So unison is singing exactly the same thing, effectively, the same melody line. The increasing use of unison and parallel harmony depicts Seymour being won over by Mushnik. So the more and more similar the two different lines get, the more kind of in tune with each other they're becoming on stage, metaphorically. If we talk about a parallel harmony as well, this is when it's two melody lines that are basically the same, except one of them is kind of pushed up a third or pushed down a third, it tends to be. So they're singing the same thing, the same rhythm, same words, but different notes which work well together. There are regular crescendos towards the end of phrases which depict Mushnik's comedic panic again, and there is use of sforzando to punctuate the end of Mushnik and Son phrase in the chorus, which kind of just makes it nice and abrupt and loud, and again kind of punctuates the end of that phrase. And the last thing that we're going to talk about then is rhythm, meter and tempo. I kind of like to lump these three guys together. They're all very different, but they kind of tend to mean similar things. The piece opens in free time, and that means that there is no tempo to begin with before the singing starts. The accompaniment is very syncopated, so offbeat, and that represents our klezmer type dance that we're hearing. The fast tempo and short note durations further emphasise the comedic value of Mushnik's panic. And the piece is written in 4/4, which is pretty standard. It helps us kind of feel like it's a dance and also sing along to it. There is use of castanet ostinato throughout, which is meant to sound funny. I don't know why, but in musicals when we hear castanets, we seem to think that they're being slightly ironic and slightly funny, slightly silly. And an ostinato is just a repeated rhythm. The use of triplets and augmented vocal rhythm towards the end emphasise the final Mushnik and Son phrase, which rounds us off nicely as this kind of sort of grand finale where Seymour is won over. And if we talk about augmented vocal rhythm, augmentation is when we've just made something longer. And finally, there's frequent use of drum fills to bridge verses and choruses. So that is it then. That is it for what we need to know in terms of elements. So your task now is to fill out the elements grid on your sheet of paper. So you've already been editing the PDF, hopefully, with all the blank spaces. You've been filling them in. But what you need to do now is fill out the elements grid at the bottom. That might seem fairly arbitrary and a little bit pointless, a little bit silly. It's really, really not. What you're doing is you're taking the information that I've given to you and kind of thrown at you in a slightly organised way, but probably not all that organised, and you're organising that information for yourself. Our brains like this when it comes to remembering things. Our brains like it when we organise that information ourselves. It's kind of like when you teach something to someone when you're revising, it tends to stick in your head a little bit better because you've organised that information yourself. So you're just going to fill out that grid with all the information that I've given you today and put it into the nice little boxes so you know where everything goes. And then finally, task 3 are just some short 2-mark questions that you might get in a question 8 in your exam. It shouldn't take you any time at all. All of the information is stuff that we've gone through today, so you can fill that out by looking at what you've got. If you've got any questions throughout today's lesson, then just drop it in the chat on Satchel. But otherwise, good luck, well done, and I will speak to you next lesson about the third and final piece of music in Little Shop of Horrors. Take care.